Hi, welcome to Communication Excellence. I'm Victor Vogel. I have a little bit of information I want to share with you this evening. It has to do with leadership and what I consider the failure of leadership that we're going through at this point in time. Now, one only has to look at our government in America to realize the impact of leadership not only on America, but everybody in this country, plus everybody in the world that's been affected by the leadership. So it's awful hard for anybody to convince me, anyway, that leadership isn't impactful. It is. It makes a difference in so many cases. And we find this true also in organizations and businesses that operate in America and around the world, for that matter. But I can speak to America this evening because that's where I've primarily worked, although I have consulted internationally also. It's important for you to understand that leadership has played a prominent role in just about everybody's lives at some time or the other. You either work for leaders or you are a leader, okay? And so this definition of trying to separate manager and supervisor from CEO and other different positions in companies, all of those people that I just mentioned are in fact getting things done through other people, doing that for them. And that's leading. So kind of like in the military, if you're out front, you're leading. And whether you're a corporal or a private or a general, if you're out in front of a charge, you're leading. And this is something I think we need to get a grasp on. So if you're interested in leadership, you're not seeing a lot of great examples in America of it right now. Particularly from the business side and the government side, and even in some cases from the sports side and other places where you turn for leadership. You probably see more effective and comprehensive and good leadership in smaller environments like your community, like your coach and other people who your pastor and other people who guide you in these lights. But even there we have failures. You have to realize that wherever there's more than a couple of people, you're going to have leadership. In fact, if there's just two people at one point in time, one seems to be leading the other. Now they may switch off or whatever, but usually in bigger groups, more than 3, 4, 5, 6 people, someone emerges as a leader and you find leadership there. And it's impactful. It's impactful. It makes a difference in just about everybody's lives. So, and I don't think today leaders take that into account in their thinking process. Now, what started me on this journey is when I entered leadership back in 1972. Prior to that, I was a Special Forces officer, so I was in leadership in the military from 1966 on up to today. That's over 5 decades, or probably about 5 decades. So what's happened is I've lived through this transition of leadership, and I I'm trying to get people to see that there's something wrong with the paradigm we've been using, something we've been using for over 40 years that I was a leader, and the rest of the other probably 16, 17 years now of retirement, of which of those 16 or 17 years, the last 6 years of them, I've been researching heavily leadership. So I haven't been restricted by who I was working for or any clients that I had to satisfy. I could look at it objectively. Just how is it working out there? Because I have a sense that something is wrong, and it's been wrong for quite a while. Could not quite figure out while I was in the midst of it what was going on, because you find yourself when you're trying to make a living, you don't necessarily grasp everything that's going on around you. You're trying to move things in a direction that will get better, and consequently, you can earn your income and your livelihood. So a lot of times getting leaders to change is difficult because they're in the middle of the heat of the battle. They're leading, and it's difficult for them to sense, one, why they need a change, and two, to make the actual changes, to take the time and the energy to do that. So I went about looking at this. This has led to a couple of discoveries, and I just want to highlight those. I won't go into detail. One of them is we spend no time really working with the leader as an individual, who they are, and them as a person and their psychic, and whether that is a fit for leadership. In fact, it's the fact we haven't done that, and the fact on the other side of the ledger, where we have put leadership positions in hierarchical structures in organizations. Just about every organization is hierarchically structured. We make leadership one of those things that you get increasing salary. So if you're just an employee and you're doing your job, you get a certain amount of salary that's valued a certain way. If you become a supervisor, that seems to be more responsibility, so you take on a little more salary. And then if you become a manager, that's even a little more responsibility, and you take on more salary, and you keep earning more and more salary as you go up the ladder. And all through that period of time, we're not asking the individual, is this something you really, or let me tell you, it's not that we're not asking them to do that. We're asking them to take that, but they're perceiving that's the only channel they have to increasing their income and making their life better. If the question would be is, if you had the choice of, say, being in sales and you love sales and you've been highly successful in sales, they want to make you a sales manager so you can make a little more money and help other people learn how to sell. And you look at that as an opportunity. But if you could make as much or more money just continuing in sales, would you accept that versus the leadership role? And that choice is what we've sort of been denying people in terms of finding out about themselves. And so one of the big things we have missed over the last 4 or 5 decades, I was a leader, and up until now, I still don't think we do it, is that need to find out to help that person grow and understand a lot about themselves and whether it fits what the profile of a leader should be. Of course, that then says maybe our paradigm of leadership we've been working on and how we've been thinking about leadership isn't right either. And so we probably should change the paradigm and more closely refine the impact of leadership really has on society. And we can see that going on if you can't, you're kind of living in denial, or you're burying your head in the sand, so to speak. So that's one of the things we haven't really done in terms of changing leadership and making it more effective. The other thing is we really, and I discovered this while I was leading, and I think I discovered it early on. For some reason, I stumbled into the world of communication and my education. And then, and I spent several years, 7 or so years, or maybe almost 8 years. I was working on a doctorate when I had to quit. But so it was probably 6, 7, going on 8 years that I was working in communication. And while I was working in school in communication in the upper division side of it, the master's on, I was working as a leader. And then the last part of that half of my career, and I was still in school to some extent, I was working as a consultant and helping organizations change their cultures. And then a large part of that was helping leaders grow, but I also spent time individually with leaders in specific departments. I had a lot of consulting functions and that. So that's something that I discovered we were missing there, that I instinctively taught, and I saw improvement. Most of the leaders, well, I would say basically all the leaders that I worked with improved, and they did better. And there was data to show that that was the case. What I did or found myself doing was, particularly with leaders who had been in position for several years, these leaders were knowledgeable about leadership skills. They knew how to deliver a performance appraisal. They knew how they were supposed to handle conflict, and they could identify the various kinds of conflict, and they knew how to handle a difficult discussion. What they didn't know was how to connect with people to relay that information to them. And I found this true as I watched leadership development all through my career. It seemed like a lot of people were going away and a lot of money was being spent on leadership, and people weren't able to come back and apply what they learned in a way that changed the behavior of their employees and or changed anything that would significantly benefit the organization. But leaders kept thinking, the CEOs and senior C-suite team kept thinking training and leadership development is still important. But I was, particularly as a consultant, I was drawing a connection. I had an approach when I was consulting. I was an independent contractor, and I contracted with other people for larger companies that I worked on. But I found that the approach that I went in was one that was appreciated by the companies, and also I found very useful. I always went in believing that I was not going to guide any projects. That was the responsibility of leadership, and we had to agree on those roles before we started the project. And another factor was to align myself with the people who control the money, the finance people. Now, sometimes I dealt directly with the CFO, other times they assigned me somebody to work with. But we were working together as we put together the project scope, what we were going to do, and cost and time and all that kind of stuff. And what we were working with the finance people is what do we need to be able to see at the end of this that you would count as successful return on your investment. So those were two areas. One, I'm not going to handle this. This is your project. It's your problem. It's your project. I'm here to help you with it, but I'm not taking accountability for it. You are. Secondly, give me some finance people that can help me show you why what we're doing and why what you've decided to do is working and how it's delivering a return for you that changes the direction you were going in the direction that you want to go. And that worked very well from a consulting perspective. And it's probably because I'm not a great salesperson. So it was a matter of convincing them that they needed to feel good with what they had. And they really liked the idea of control. So it's part of the leadership dynamic, I guess. But we found that to be a useful tool. And what I found was that the real problem, particularly for projects where leaders had been in position for years, wasn't teaching them or trying to teach them a different process or a different leadership skill. It was really teaching them how to connect with their people with the skills they knew, because they were having trouble connecting with individuals. So, what they were discovering as we went through the process of education and working and mentoring, they were finding that there are different communication approaches to different leadership skill sets. So if you're doing a performance appraisal, you're approaching people from one perspective, and certain communication skills, both what I call interpersonal communication. Interpersonal defined as the emotional, psychological aspects of communicating. And then there's another whole process of how you communicate. The process, the system that it's a closed system that you operate in from a communication perspective, that allows you how you create a message, how you deliver a message, how you receive a message, how you let people know that you've received the message, how they need to know, and how to listen to you to get the feedback to make sure that you have heard them correctly and you're aligned and everything's going to go the way you thought it was going to go. If not, then you again rework through that process in a loop. So it's like a closed system. It's a loop, and then you create another message with a little more information. If something got in the way of that message being delivered correctly, you corrected that. You did the things you needed to do to know the other person on the other side so they could receive the message effectively. They had to learn to listen appropriately. They make sure they were hearing and seeing and understanding and knowing your message was congruent. All of those things, along with the concept of how emotional intelligence helped us do all of that better. Then you could connect, and then people were grasping it. They were beginning to understand how it was going to help them, but also why it was helping them. And in many cases where we had success with that kind of a consulting approach into leadership, and if they were off on some sort of skill, we would teach that also. But that communication is what the link was. It was a connecting piece where employees began to grasp it. And in many cases, they were learning new stuff, and it was stuff they could take back and apply in their daily lives. Sometimes at home, sometimes with friends or whatever, and that began to enhance their capabilities so they could begin to even think about maybe some different kinds of, maybe they might want to be a leader down the road based on the fact that the way they were being led, the way they were being communicated with, how they were connected with, how the skills were used appropriately through that connection. And so that's what I discovered. And for over almost 40 years, I was helping leaders be more effective. There are leaders out there who have been trained how to be more effective and are more effective. They're out there. And it wasn't just I mean, there's some other people who have done similar kinds of things. So it's not like there aren't leaders out there that aren't good quality leaders, but it's not a large grouping of people. And I wanted to help people understand that that's the case, that we who were found a tool or a skill or some sort of approach that worked, we helped change leadership and for the better. And it sustained. And it's sustained today. I can still see some of the people I've worked with that I've helped develop into leaders who are still leading effectively today and are exceptionally high level places. But I'm one person in that I probably could, probably list on 100 leaders I developed out of how many billions of leaders that are out there, or millions or high millions of, I don't know if we be billions of leaders, but in the high millions of leaders that are out there, that are still struggling. Many of them still struggling, and it's not like they're not seeking. They are seeking. They're just not necessarily getting the right leadership development. And so I kind of wanted to talk. I went in and I did probably about 3 years of in-depth talking with leaders, talking with leadership development people, talking with consultants, talking with coaches, talking with as many people as I could, CEOs, executives, CHRO, a bunch of people, talking about the impact we've had from leadership development. And it's interesting because when you get into the corporate realm and up into the corporate human resource development and executives, and they're very high on leadership development. So some of these people, as I went back with them and talked with them and hit them with the reality that leadership development really isn't delivering much, they rejected that. They basically argued with me. That's not true. We've been dumping millions of dollars. And I've been saying, yes, you have, but you haven't been getting a return on your investment. And they go, no, that's not the case. And it was really hard for them to see. Some people were, in fact, getting a return on investment. They had found, like I said, people I've worked with found that right path, and other people, I'm sure, other consultants and coaches have found that right path. But it isn't permeating the masses of businesses and organizations that have leaders. And everybody has leaders. It's just something that's there. It almost comes if you put a whole 10 people together that didn't know each other on an island, stranded, never seen each other, never talked to each other in their whole life, if they found a way to communicate, somebody's going to become a leader, and you're going to have a hierarchical structure in leadership. It's the way it is. Now, we've thought about that. We don't like that because we've seen it creates power bases, and we want to resist that, okay? And that in itself is something powerful that people resist leadership for. And they want to flatten things. They want everybody to be a leader. But when we tried that in the 1990s, it didn't work because the people the middle management you took out of there and responsibility you pushed down, two things. In one case, we weren't paying them for the extra work they were taking on. And then secondly, we didn't ask them if they wanted it. They didn't want that. They just wanted better leadership. But companies just couldn't grasp how to do that. And one of these reasons is we created this monster, and I want to share that monster with you and kind of expose it a little bit as we go through this. So let me just switch over here to the presentation I'd like to give you this evening. I'm not going to go through this whole. This is an article I wrote. You can find this on Substack, LinkedIn. I don't know where else I'll put it. Facebook, wherever I can put it, and people will allow it to be there. This is the state of leadership development. And that state of leadership development is pretty accurate. I will tell you up front, I used AI to collect some of this information, but I validated. I made AI provide me the list of resources they said they got the information from. I went back and looked at those resources. Yes, they got it from those resources. Yes, that's what the information says. And having lived, and this is the real clear part about it, having lived these five decades through all of this, I know this is pretty accurate stuff. So I kind of want to just highlight some of this with you so that you understand that leadership is critical. As organizational executives, you need to grasp a hold of that and start taking more accountability for it, because we've made some mistakes with leadership in organizations. And we'll show that. So let me just get into some of this. I'm going to use the article as the tool for us to look at. I'm not going to go through everything, but there are some key points I want to bring out. And I'll try to keep this as short as possible, but I want to make sure you got it all in there. I want you to understand the shift from what we call internal apprenticeship, or what I termed internal apprenticeship, to external outsourcing. Okay? And really what this is, let me just kind of come down here to when this sort of began. And actually it's interesting because it began right at when I was entering in. I had only been in business maybe 8 or 9 years as a leader when this started transitioning. So that's why I say I was here a little before it, and then it started transitioning, and then I was here all the way up until now, and have seen the whole movement that I'm about to share with you. And so the shift of external leadership development and selection began in earnest during the 1980s. Probably I'd say mid-1980s. The period saw the rise of the free agent manager. Prior to this, a CEO was almost always a 30-year veteran of the firm itself. They were brought up from internally in the organization, and that was a big factor going on. By the 1990s, boards began looking to external executive search firms and management consultants like McKinsey and BCG and Bain and other groups to find transformational leaders who could navigate the digital revolution. So the digital revolution, it was really the igniter of changing how we developed and selected leadership for companies. Until that time, we were bringing them from within the company. They were working their way up the ladder. They knew that company inside and out. They knew everything about it, what made it work, what didn't make it work. And they were always brought up through the ranks, and that was one way, that very top position that very few people attain, because once they were there, they stayed 20 or 30 years. That internal promotion was permeating everything, all the way from crew leader and a person who was on the line in a manufacturing plant and worked their way all the way up to finally running Ford Motor Company. Okay? So some of that was important to understand because it was a community. It was a unifying thing. People loved talking about how they worked for their company. It was their company. They even talked about their company. And many of the benefits provided that sense of value to that company. Some were, profit sharing, giving employees real stock, that they could hold on to, and it would grow as the company grew, and they could see as they contributed, their stock was increased. Different kinds of retirement plans that were good with that. And some companies that were in tough locations or it was tough to find people were actually providing the lower income people a significantly better living in their life than they would have had without these companies. Like in Virginia, there was the coal mining companies. They actually built housing to put people in. And I worked for a company at one point in time that hired people in the hospitality industry who hired people who worked different times of the year. There was where it was very busy, it was vacation kinds of periods or the weather or whatever it was. And in some cases, it was hard to find people in those locations to staff those businesses. And we literally built dorms to house them. So they could, in one case, they might be working in the northern part of the country and working for a company, and they were living there until winter started to hit, and they were working through the summer. That was their season for hospitality, so to speak, or vacationing or whatever in that area. Maybe it was for golfing, mountains, or whatever. And then when winter came on, those people migrated to Florida or the southern coast. Or California, and they were finding jobs there, and so if housing wasn't available, people were building housing, or they were buying apartment complexes and putting people up, and those kinds of things were actually transition. When you came in, maybe your whole health care for you and your whole family was there. And then they would take out $10 million term life insurance policy on you while you were working for them to kind of let your family know they were going to have a pretty substantial, something happened to you. They had a substantial living ahead of them. So all of those things were in play when I came in, happening in a lot of places when I came into the business world. In the military, they house you and everything like that. So, but this was kind of unique. For there were places where we had apartments, and you didn't have to pay for housing. It was there for you. Sometimes they would pay for all of your college education, and sometimes provide grants for your kids to go to school. So all of this was happening before these 1980 periods. Then the 1980s came in and the technology began to take hold, and the things that were impacting selecting people were the velocity of the technology. Internal training could no longer keep pace with the specialized digital computerizing. This is, where email was hitting, all kinds of things were hitting that people had to be trained on and worked on, and different programs kept changing very rapidly. I mean, you'd get one version of email and then you get another version, and you got another. We're experiencing that a little bit now with AI and subscriptions versus buying the software, and sort of backing out of offering software to be purchased, and the only way you can get it is subscription now, and you kind of locked into that because you're locked into everything you do is based around your computer or your phone. So we're experiencing that now to some extent, but this was an absolutely newness coming on board here, and people were going, wow. They were totally wowed by it, totally taken back, didn't have the training, didn't have the skill sets for this. So what this did is this created in the 90s, boards faced the pressure to deliver immediately quarter results. I remember that real highly. People were pressed, they went from looking at things in an annual and a 5-year plan to quarterly, because there was a lot of divestiture and acquisition. People were selling their companies and getting out, to taking the money that they could get in and getting out, and letting that, and then the company goes forward under investor ownership, which totally changes the culture, changes everything about the company, and made it extremely difficult for people to find other people, because people were leaving and going and doing different things, and then you had to go try to hire somebody, and you didn't have time to bring them up through the company, where you had an HR group that was taking care of them, that was training them, that made sure they understood the culture, all that kind of stuff. There was a group in there really trained to do that. But this just overwhelmed that group. You didn't have enough people, because you weren't training people going up through the ranks. You weren't training hundreds of them, because now the need was not just a few people in an organization, but thousands across an industry, a new industry, or an industry that is beginning to upgrade the existing industries. So all of that was happening in the 80s and 90s. A lot of divestitures, a lot of acquisitions, a lot of turnover, and people that were involved in HR were struggling. They didn't have that capacity, and they couldn't find the people with the training behind them, because nobody had been doing significant training. They just trained for what they exactly needed, and they didn't need it very often. So 40 years of trends. The disconnect between spin and satisfaction of failed leadership paradigm is what I want to kind of talk about. So what happened was, all through those 80s and 90s, companies began to outsource their selection of people. You begin to see a lot of headhunters come on the market, a lot of companies that were employment agencies. Temporary services began to explode, because people were trying to fill in with temporary people to do things they needed to have done immediately, but wouldn't need them in the company forever. All of that was beginning to explode. You begin to see a lot of companies coming on board who were hiring, and some were specializing in areas like finance, or they called it IT then, information technology. There were special groups building up around that, and that's all they hired. Then they moved from, they took it another layer, and they said, well, you've got this group of people that you're hiring that are managers, leaders, employees, etc. So different groups are hiring at different levels for that. Then you had the executive headhunters. These were the people who were looking for CEOs and chief executive officers, chief financial officers, because to be honest, as these divestitures and acquisitions started exploding, as companies started merging, people were being let go, people were needed, we didn't particularly want this CEO to run this company, so we needed to find another CEO. So and we didn't have them in the organization, so we kind of need to, or we acquired a company and it requires a new CEO that has that kind of talent that no, this existing CEO didn't, and nobody had. So we had to let that CEO go and find a new CEO and bring him on board. All that was. It was like a madhouse. It was like a madhouse, and that's where managers and executives were asking premium prices. They could kind of pick and choose the companies they wanted to go to because there was a lot of need, but not a lot of talent out there. And so the talent that was out there had that advantage at this point in time. So out of that began to spring the need for us to get people ready. And most companies were basically then deciding, okay, I'm going to bring McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group or Price Waterhouse. I'm going to bring some consultants in to work next to my people to kind of get them to the level where they need to be. And so you had a lot of consulting groups beginning. The big four were beginning to really amass a lot of higher level corporations under their umbrella, and they were putting together programs. They were hiring people out of Harvard, out of all of the Ivy League schools and everything as fast as they could, turning them loose with people and bringing in professors to work with them so they could start designing things to present to companies to say, here's the package. This is the deal. This will make the banks the best banks ever. I've got the banking package. I'm that in. Put this banking package in, you're good. And that a lot of those things came about in the 1990s and early 2000s, and they were putting this stuff in like crazy. And so along with that came the idea, well, our HR groups didn't do very well in getting us staffed and keeping us staffed. We had to go outside to find that. So where did we go? Well, we went to leadership and development firms to develop leadership we needed for the company. We wanted the people to learn how to treat their people right, to learn how to create a strategy, to do, the skills, how to fire somebody, how to hire somebody, how to do a performance program. We need them to do all of these leadership things, and our HR group wasn't trained to do that. They weren't ready to handle all of that. So you began to see these leadership development groups pop up. And a lot of consultants, a lot of independent consultants, but a lot of companies, like the major companies. But then you got a mid-sized consulting group level in there that came on board also. That I contracted out to a lot of those consulting firms and worked, as an independent contractor with them to help them do whatever they needed to do. And so you had a lot of us out there that were hired at some exceptionally enormous rates. I mean, I contracted out. I knew what I was billing, charging the client, and that was. Yeah, sometimes you had to shake your head how much you were getting because you didn't believe you were worth it, but people were paying it. But then I saw the bills. I was in charge of doing a major organizational change, and I saw the invoices coming through to the finance department, then back out and being paid. And I saw what they were charging that company for me, and then I realized I was worth even more than that. So it is pretty phenomenal how fast that took off and how big that became and how that mushroomed into this industry, of leadership development industry. And that's kind of what I want to share with you. That's where our paradigm is now. Our paradigm is a fixed philosophy about leaders, and people have built a lot of educational programs, spent a lot of money, making a lot of money, selling these programs and these processes and these assessments to people who are in companies who are still today starting up companies, and they're still not great leaders. They never had leadership development and training. They just happened to stumble into something that worked. And wow, who ever thought I'd be worth $1 million or $2 million now with 1,000 or 1,500 people working for me? I have no idea how to handle that. And so you hire somebody in HR, assuming they know how to do that, but their skill set is not necessarily developing. It's running all the other aspects of it. That was a component, but a lot of times they ended up saying, hey, let's outsource this to this group over here. I like what they're doing. So the leadership development industry became a prominent industry. So I'll cover a couple of charts here for you. So despite the professionalization of leadership development, the data from Gallup, McKinsey, and some of these people who kind of turned also into research groups, kind of researching what's going on with leadership. Harvard Business Review is one of them, McKinsey, and some of the other groups too. Watson Wyatt did a lot in leadership research. Over the last 4 decades, suggests a significant efficacy gap. And that was, there was a lot of leadership training going on. It was a lot of it being sourced out, a ton of it. And the problem was it didn't seem to be transferring in to leadership, the delivery of leadership as it should be in organizations. And so from this little chart here represents from the 1980s to the 2020s, where we are today, sort of a look at employee engagement. How engaged were employees in doing their job? You know, how much were they actually spending focused on that job, interested in that job, and how much of it was being pushed and how much was it where they just didn't do it. So you had employee engagement. Now, employees, let me jump down to organizational satisfaction here. Organizational satisfaction has a direct correlation to leadership satisfaction and organizational satisfaction and employee engagement. There's a lot of, if you took each of those studies and put them together and run a statistical correlation on them, they correlate highly. They correlate highly. In other words, people who were not satisfied with the organization were not satisfied primarily because they weren't satisfied with their leadership that were leading them. And because of that, they weren't that interested in doing the job. The job, there was not a lot of excitement that caused them to be engaged in doing the work. Maybe they just do what they had to do. Okay. So consequently, if that satisfaction level was low, leadership in the organization, they weren't interested in the job that much. A lot of people were moving between companies, and it was readily available in the 80s and 90s for them to do that. You know, if you didn't feel valued and you just didn't like the way you were being led, you start putting your resume out. And within a short period of time, you were working for somebody else who said they were going to do the same thing, but maybe they didn't. There weren't a lot of great leadership organizations out there. So anyway, you can see that in the 1980s and the 90s beginning, there was measured intermittent loyalty to the company for employee engagement turnover. It was kind of low during this period of time because it was the gold watch. You were still going into the 80s and during the 80s, you were still attached to the corporation because you still had some of those benefits that you didn't want to leave behind. And they kind of held you there, even if your satisfaction level was a little low. But even in the 80s and 90s, there's a lot of trust in companies and institutions. Now, not all through the 90s, but going into the 90s is what I would say. Then around 2000, now I'd say going mid 1990s from my experience into 2000s, it trended between only 26 to 30% of employees were highly engaged. They were excited about doing their job. That meant 70% wasn't. Now, that could have been a wide range. It could have been, there were some that, yes, were still okay, satisfied with the job, but not excited about it, all the way down to, I'm just quiet quitting. I'm doing whatever I have to do until I can find the next job. But any of that range is not where you'd want your employees to be. You'd want them to be highly engaged in doing the job. You don't want average company. You don't want average results. No company did. Then there was increased job hopping because of that. This is where people were going between companies. Like I said, it was readily available, and it eroded by 2008. When the financial crisis hit, when we had the recession that came on 2000, many of us were hurt by that, a lot of us. It just, the whole trust in companies and the whole trust in the system of, trickle down economy and all that, nothing was trickling down. Trust me, nothing was trickling down, and had not trickled down. You could see the difference between when I came on board and how much was being offered to you to come on board then versus 1990s. It had been basically, benefits had been reduced, retirement packages had been reduced. Some people were trying to figure out how to take full-time jobs and put it into part-time segments so they didn't have to pay benefits of any kind to employees. So all of that was going on in the 80s and 90s and up into the 2000s. So then the 2020 hit, and of course we had, a pandemic, and companies were just, people couldn't work, period. And that's where people really saw what they were perceived and valued. And for example, it's an area where we used to downgrade people who picked up our garbage and people who served as, at grocery stores, checked us out at the counters or wherever that lower income sort of the job you didn't want to do became the heroes. They were there for you. They went in every day to make sure the grocery store was open so you could get your food because you didn't want to go out yourself and get it. They became heroes almost. And that changed the whole image of how people were looking at corporations, how they were looking at the job market, and it converted a lot of people into a remote world that companies are still fighting with today. They are saying you need to come back into the office and go to work, and employees are going, why? You're getting more productivity. I can show you. There's statistics showing stronger productivity. Well, we're not sure why. We just want you back here. Well, we know why, because the people who are still running these organizations still come from that 80s and 90s power-based, and maybe your late 70s power-based, control-oriented leadership paradigm. and it's still operating today. And people are still struggling with it. They keep saying, and leadership development keeps saying it's not what you're supposed to be doing, and leaders keep sending their leaders underneath them to these programs saying you should learn this so you can relate to your employees, but they don't relate to their leaders that way, and they don't go to these things. Very seldom do you see executives. I can remember one time I actually went to a CEO program, and people were, I'm going, wow, this is a little different. This is a little different. It it was an amazing kind of thing to participate in because they were talking about all the same issues that they were struggling with, trying to get their employees to do that they were having trouble struggling with. But it took just a CEO kind of leadership program for them to go to it to learn instead of going with their people and learning, which would have been a really great exposure thing. They had to go separate for some reason. So these are the dynamics you were seeing in leadership development. Okay, leadership development was talking about emotional intelligence. They were talking about, connecting with your people and all those kinds of things. But there wasn't a follow-up. There wasn't a connection that allowed people to come back into the system and that had been created and then modify that system enough to apply it so that you could see that it would work. And that's that communication part I talked to you about earlier that was missing. That's still missing in today's education. The issue here became employees across corporations and generally across the world were only engaged about 30 to 32%, 70% of the employees. Now, we've been the most productive we've ever been, but there are a lot of other reasons besides employee productivity for those productions. Some of the higher cost items and whole bunches of reasons why people are making more money versus, productivity through work. There was during the 20s and 21 period, there was this, the quiet resignation, the quiet quitting. Everybody was out. And of course, everybody was on YouTube and everything telling you can earn millions of dollars if you just jump into this affiliate program or this program or that program. Of course, those programs, if you look them up and compare them, are not strong revenue producers like people said. Yes, there are some kids in high school today with AI that are making more money than their parents made and making more money, and they're becoming millionaires. Okay? A few, maybe a extreme minority of the population out there that could be working or at coming out of high school and going into that working age. Only an extreme minority of people are those people who are going in and somehow, for some reason, whatever they have, talent, or it happens to be the right time, or they hit at the right moment, or they somehow got the right product in their hands, or whatever it was, it clicked and it worked for them. But that is not the vast majority of people in this country. It is just a minority few. And what you have is you have a whole bunch of employees citing lack of purpose. They're quitting because they're not valued. There doesn't seem to be a lack of purpose. There's poor manager empathy. They're not treated correctly. They're just, they're numbers. And if you look at AI, and you think you've got a mechanical robot that's going to replace a human being, and that robot doesn't eat, it doesn't get sick, it doesn't do a lot of things. that employees need money for, this is what managers want to replace employees with. And consequently, why would they feel valued right now? Why would they feel valued? And so we're at this point now where leadership development, the idea that we need leaders, they keep pushing this strongly. This is a big group of people. Let's take a look at how big they are right now, I think. Here you go. Now, in the 1980s, if you adjusted for inflation, okay, so the dollar amount might be different, but if you adjusted that dollar amount then for what it is worth today, they would have been spending about $10 billion just on leadership development worldwide. $10 billion. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot today when Donald Trump can sue you for $10 billion, but that covered worldwide and probably predominantly in the United States. I don't know that there were a lot of large leadership development groups scattered out through Africa or South America or China or Russia even during that period of time. Then as we entered into 2000s, this is 20 years later, all of a sudden we're spending $25 billion on leadership development. That's not training everything. I mean, there's a bigger training organization out there for a lot of skills and stuff that are even larger than that. We're just talking about leaders, getting leaders to be able to lead effectively, $25 billion business now. Well, 20 years later, it's a $60+ billion business. And I'm thinking it's closer to $100 billion now. $100 billion we spend annually on trying to get leaders to be more effective within organizations. At the same time, we have 4 or 5 tech bros out there trying to get rid of all of those leaders. So you've got a $100 billion organization over here who is going to lose out considerable amount of money based on what these tech bros are doing. And trying to create, and they're trying to continue to sustain their product. And they're looking at if you change the leadership paradigm, I'd have to change products. I'd have to change my thought process. But there are some people who are bringing those products up along that are starting their small organizations outside of them, like Daniel Goleman has an emotional intelligence group. That's somewhat different than what's going on out here in the leadership development world, although they're trying to integrate those two now. And if they integrate, that would be a big, massive group of people. So what's happening, they're spending all this this money, $60 billion to train leaders. Now, these leaders are going to go back and supposedly apply that into their business environment and then providing a benefit and an enhancement to the organization. So as we look at how that happened, you have during this time, and generally speaking, you have a lot of people say when they attend leadership development programs, they're positive about it. If you ask them if they were positive, was it a positive experience? Did you learn something? Oh yeah, I did. Now, a lot of these programs, some of them are brought in-house to corporations, but a lot of them are in San Diego or Orlando or Rocky Mountains or where ski resorts are. You get my drift. They're nice places to go to. Miami, Orlando, Key West, okay, just New York City, and you can go on and on. So there was a lot of positive influence, or a lot of positive results coming from people who went to these courses, which made leaders believe that this was a very positive kind of thing. And now, when you say, is it significantly impacting the organization? When you ask those same people who said this was really positive, is this significantly impacting those organizations? You get down to 10 to 15%. Uh-oh. I went to this. I enjoyed it. I actually learned something. Actually, there are other research studies that show that only 25% of people that attend these things actually learn something new. Maybe they get a different pitch on it, different angle, but not much new. Maybe a different approach. I don't know. But anyway, what has been consistently true is all through these development programs, and still to today, you only get about a 10 to 15%. Maybe I've seen it as high as 20%, where the organization may be getting some kind of contribution back. Then the question becomes, how much does this impact that connection and relationship with employees so that employees change their behavior and begin to react differently? That drops down to around 10%, 10 to 15% in that area. So if that's the case, are we moving the needle? Are we moving the needle on employees being satisfied with leaders, turnover being reduced, employees being engaged, productivity increasing, and some other things like that? And that's where you jump back up to these numbers. And the answer is no. Over the years, and particularly these last couple of, the 2000s into the 20s, it's been declining. It's been declining. What part of your business would you spend $60 billion on, knowing that you're only getting 10 or 15% of the people are responding in a way that does anything for you? And the whole idea of things that would help you improve, where people stayed at your job, where they were happy with you as a company and the job, and they were locked in to doing their job 70, 80% of the day, or all the time, their time they're working. And during that time, your production increased from the time they were only 15 to 30% involved to 70% and 80% involved. That increased production should be returned to you in all kinds of positive ways you could measure on the financial chart. This is the paradigm of leadership development today. It's in the data. I mean, you can go back and look through it. My question then became, why in the world are we doing all this? Executive satisfaction was the answer. In the 1980s, they were getting 70% ratings, high ratings on positive satisfaction, 45% in the 2000s, and on into the 2020s until the COVID hit. They were getting high ratings, and 45% felt like it was only 45% were concerned, which meant 60-some% people were satisfied with the leadership development was coming in there. And yet they didn't see these other numbers. Either they didn't see them or it wasn't brought to their attention or they didn't really care. I don't know which one it was. I find it hard to believe they can't care. I've never met many CEOs that didn't care about that. But then you go down to 2020 here, and all of a sudden it has really dropped considerably. 1 in 10 CEOs feel like leadership development programs provide any skills needed that you need today. So that is where we are today. That is the current state of leadership development today. It is why I wrote the book Renaissance Leadership Odyssey, saying you have to change the paradigm of leadership, you have to change the paradigm of leadership development, and you have to design it around what's going on and what's coming and about to hit you in the face. And if you're not doing that now, it'll be way, way too late while you're trying to you will run into what happened to these people back in the 1980s and 90s when the internet and everything hit them. They were just overwhelmed. You're going to get overwhelmed if you don't open up your eyes and start look at what's happening. And then you can see the results of it in our government. You can see it in companies and how they feel about employees right now, where they're trying to go with AI. The whole dynamic is there. So you can see the increase, and this kind of correlated to the technology. This kind of relates and shows you the key focus when the spending started going. But we're spending a lot more on leadership development now during ages of AI, agile training, agency, all of that kind of stuff. So what do you do? What's going on? So I want to kind of run through a lot of this other information you can just look at, but I want to get down to where can I go for help? So right now, the rise of high stakes coaching and mentorship, there's a lot of value being placed on people who come in and work directly with other people, coaching or consulting in that array, but primarily coaching. Coaching, keeping people up, keeping their emotions up, helping them feel good about who they are and what they can achieve and those kinds of things. What is valued in them? That's the difference between a consultant is you bring a consultant in as in an expert area like leadership, and they then put programs in and educate people about leadership or communication or something. A coach is there telling this person who's really had all this information, don't get down on yourself and keep going forward. You have, how can you enhance who you are and apply that towards how can you use your work to enhance who you are? Those kinds of questions. So there are a lot of CEOs put in a lot of faith in this right now. And there are a lot of, unfortunately, what's happening is you have a lot of people who, we have something like the International Coaching Federation. Now, there's a group of experts, coachers, okay? They have to train people to coach. But those expert coachers probably have, amongst all of them, dozens of years of experiences, each of them. So they're delivering a bunch of people out here into the coaching arena who do not have this 10 to 12 years experience these instructors have. And so, what you're expecting out of these folks, you may or may not be getting, but if you do not have a handle on how to look and evaluate this as a CEO, if you're not digging your hands into it and evaluating it, you're going to find yourself trying to answer the question I presented to you before. Why are you spending $60 billion on something that isn't working? okay, and hasn't worked for 4 decades, and you kept spending the money. How do you answer that question, Mr. CEO? So the same thing is happening here. We're rushing wildly into coaching and other things, and then there's other alternatives. We don't have enough heavy top flight leaders, CEOs, C-suite kind of leaders for companies that are coming up for the demand they have in the environment where people are moving from place to place to place to place as fast as they can because there's just no sense of loyalty or satisfaction to an organization. So one of those areas that is popular is fractional leadership. And that's where you hire somebody like myself. So okay, I've got 45 years or 50 years of HR background and leadership development and changing and organizational change and all that kind of stuff behind me. I could probably come in, take a quick look at an organization, and clean it up real quick from an HR perspective inside and reestablish and move your organization forward. And you could now, but that there is a dilemma with this, and that they feel like you can do this part time. Okay, you can come in and I'll call you if I have a particular thing that I can't do. So I'll call you to come in and help me do it so I can learn how to do it. And then you can go. So there are some people out there who are engaged in wanting to do that and wanting to highlight that and enhance that value. You're talking about people mostly at the senior level. It probably is not enough. It's probably going to be overpriced for you to try to do that at a mid-level leader scenario. That is going to be a big problem. You're going to have to be paying too much. So, and then you have consultants, and consultants are really on the chopping block now for delivering return on investment. No more bring me your program and plug it in and then walk away and it doesn't work. That's now out of the picture. CEOs have decided they don't like that thing, and they want to see the return on investment. So what consultants are doing are evergreen or more customized programs to fit the client's need, and they're working probably more closely with trying to stay within the organization for a period of time. That's the project I had. Began with a manufacturing segment group. We went down and did a little work about culture and change it. Kind of got a lot better, and people were getting excited and things were going on. All of a sudden, the corporation that owned that company went, "Hey, we want you to do this for the whole damn corporation." And we're going, whoa, what? Well, let us go back and write out what we think that bill's going to be. And it was in the millions of dollars, multi-millions of dollars. And they still wanted to do it. They were an international company. They felt it was really going to benefit them. And there was a purpose behind what they were doing. But and as part of that project, I was running or overseeing the cultural change segment of this organizational change project, and while I was doing that and working with every department, and I had myself and I had a few of the consultant, the guy that I contracted with, a few of his people working for me directly underneath me, and then I contracted with multiple other consulting companies that come in and help these departments restructure themselves. If the HR might have been Watson Wyatt, if it was finance, it might have been Price Waterhouse, if it was strategy or something like that, or communications, something like maybe it was a Boston Consulting Group. We brought in several companies, and then in some companies we went out to universities and worked with professors and created a supply chain management process. So we did all of that kind of stuff. That is kind of like a fractional leader. But we were in there. It wasn't a part. We were in there day in and day out. We didn't go in for an hour or two and get out. We didn't go in for a few days and get out. We were there almost 3 years inside this organization. And the finance company was, like I said, the finance director wasn't a finance company. It was a finance VP. Yeah, we would working with him every day saying, how's this affecting your line? How's this affecting your line? He's going, this is great. Let's do this, and keep going. So those things were all part of the project you had to get into. So it was more the consulting arena, I would say, and these are the kinds of things you have to get into, and the company has to commit to long-term impact effort. And it's not going to be like a fractional consultant where you bring them in when you're working on a problem that you've never dealt with before, you don't have experience in, and you want to work with them for a little bit, and then they can go home. So there's this whole arena of things that people are bouncing around in here trying to make work, much of which is what happens when you don't create an organization where you develop everything within the organization so that your expertise is always there with you and growing and growing and growing on an ongoing basis. Instead of putting a few years and growing these people, they started looking for them outside, and the company couldn't find the fit for the culture, couldn't fit exact fit for the problem or whatever, and it caused a lot of headaches and a lot of frustration with people. They then became disgruntled, went somewhere else. All that was going on. They could have been building all of that as they did internally. The culture builds stronger. You keep putting money back into your employees and letting them grow as they're growing with you, and they want to learn more and more, and you're there, so you find the 4 or 5 people who are potential CEOs for you, and you spend 6 years developing them. So you got to pick of 4 that could do the job as well as you when the time comes. And then they start doing that same thing. And you process that internal development, that communal representation of a community, company-based environment. And everybody is trying to help everybody, and everybody is benefiting from it. All of those dynamics play in. That's where we need to go down the road. Where AI fits in there is going to be interesting. I think there are visions of some people in the tech world that they can take over companies. They can just take it over. Let's just do it all AI. Let's do that. I think we can do that. I mean, they're tickled because they like that challenge. They're not really worried about what that's doing to the rest of the world's economy. They just know where that is with them. And so that's what we're facing right now. That's what we're coming into. I like to think that somewhere in this process that we're going to get our heads together and start thinking about what's in the best interest of humanity in general. Why are we really in business? Is it just to make money for a few people, or just to reach the top pinnacle of something? Is there something that we don't have to be, that doesn't have to be invented? It just really, just because it can be and it's really elite, but it doesn't necessarily, the cost of that is humanity suffering. To get that really, we got that one robot that can think like a human. Costs, about 300,000 jobs and, billions of dollars. It could have been spent on education or food or water or, farming or whatever. But we got that one person who can now write, see me write. I love it. I love it. It's a exciting time to look at. It's a scary time to consider. It's a scary time to consider. That's kind of why I wrote this. There's a lot more to this paper than just that. You can read it. Spent probably 5 or 6 years interviewing a whole lot of people, then researching a lot and reading a lot and talking to everybody from CEOs of companies and all over the country, in Dallas and Detroit and Oklahoma City and Atlanta and other places. Just having drinks with people in bars, asking, what do you do? I work for General Motors on the production line, so for GM trucks. Tell me about that. How's it going? You guys have pretty good ways there, don't you? Well, here's what's going on, and you get the same story consistently across different people at different levels, and you begin to see it when it pops up, and then you start researching it to find the data to support it, and there it is. And you're telling people this paradigm isn't working. You need to take a different direction. And it would be a really good call to put a halt on AI. Just slow it down immensely. Don't throw it into your Googles and Apples and all your programs and everything immediately. Slow it down. Ask the cost. Not just the cost in money. What about the cost in life? What is it costing us to do this? And why couldn't we take time out and take a breather and go down to the groups of employees and leaders who work with those employees and spend time saying, what's it going to take for you guys to connect, so that what can happen is when that leader is leading effectively, what you want to hear from employees are, we want you. We want you as a leader. And we grant you the authority to lead us. When you're hearing that kind of statements from your employees, we need you, we want you. We don't want you changing. We know you're going to leave. But then, Mr. CEO, this is the kind of person we want, and every person you send us to take his place. Any person that's not like that, we're not going to grant them the authority to lead us. But a leader like him, we will grant that authority right away. And then we know that if you come down and talk with us, we'll tell you what our needs are. And if you're supplying those needs, we'll try to figure out how to make sure less errors happen. We can come up with a few ideas that can save you some money. We can, during a tough time when pressure's on, we can put in the extra effort for you. That is the culture you're looking for. All right, I've spent way too much time here. But I think it's valuable time. Now, if you don't watch it all, I don't know. I can't make you watch it. I can't make you sit through all of it because it's going to get you thinking about things. I can't make you watch it 2 or 3 times. So it may get you, every time you see it, you may think something, clicks in about you. Okay? But I can tell you that if you don't spend some time looking at something like this and recognize what's going on, I mean, can you imagine me asking a group of CEOs who spend $60 billion a year why they're not getting anything for their money? And pretty much the data is pretty much saying it. And the first thing is because they're accountable, they'll come up with excuses. But that's a natural tendency. But eventually, after enough drinks, they'll forget the excuses and admit, we need to do something here. So hopefully. And hopefully our United States government will look. Some of the things, by the way, one last thing was, these are references, but one of the things that was brought out was maybe take a look at how we develop. So we need to start thinking out of the box a little bit. Maybe we bring back the education department in the government and we start thinking about how we can convert situations because one of the things that was discovered that's cited in this study is that universities aren't delivering the product that people need in leadership. It's not there. All the time people are asked, tell me about your degree and what you learned about leadership. Tell me about how you feel now that you've been in company 6 or 7 months. I learned more in 6 months in this company than I learned in 4 years in that university. That's a common comment. Okay, that's because our universities are stagnated about their learning and what needs to happen about leadership. They're out of touch. It's one reason I didn't complete my doctorate. I didn't feel comfortable at the university I was at. I didn't feel comfortable with their demand to adhere to a certain situation or approach to things when I was telling them, and I was working in those environments around the world with large billion-dollar organizations making things happen with the method I was telling them they need to consider. And they were going, no, if you can't do this, you can't get a PhD. I don't need the PhD then because I'm making it happen over here. The only thing I would need a PhD for is to go back into a stochastic, moldy university environment that's not exciting. Okay? There's another reason I like a podcaster named Wolfer. He's different. He comes out. He's honest. It's almost like he wears his honesty on his sleeve. I'm sure it gets him into trouble. But it also got him into the podcast world where he's pretty prominent. So there you go, folks. I'm going to tell you, anybody who wants to discuss with me, I'll be glad to discuss this with anybody who wants to discuss this. Okay? I kind of know where we need to go. I think I know where we need to go. I wrote that in my books. My books are all on my website. I do not publish them through Amazon or Apple or anybody else. If you want to learn about them, you got to go buy them from me. And I'll be glad to talk about them. I'll be glad to share my thoughts on them. I'll be glad to just have coffee and talk until your heart's content about this remotely, just like this. They're fun things to do. You're welcome to do that. You can find that on victorvogel.com or victorlvogel.com is the latest website. Yeah, Victor L. Vogel and victorvogel.com will get you to the same website. I own both of them. So both of those are there. My books are there. Renaissance Leadership Odyssey is the book that talks about this stuff, the change, the leadership focus and change. So we're entering into tough environment. Hopefully you'll take note and somebody pick it up also and run with it who's going to be excited and make a lot of things happen with it. I'm here to help anybody any way I can, so you can talk with me. I just want leadership to be something that helps people become their lives to become better because of it. And right now, we don't seem to be going down that route. Okay, so you have a really good day, and we'll see if we can come out of here.